Live. Good morning. Welcome to the December Policy and Personnel Committee meeting of the Board of Education. I'm Deborah Brooks, the committee chairperson. Cindy, would you take roll, please?
You're on mute, Cindy.
Okay, there we go. Ms. Brooks?
Here.
Ms. Melkonian?
Here.
Ms. Bays?
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Smith? And Mr. Block?
Present.
Mr. Smith is here. I see
Okay.
his icon anyway. His
Yeah,
mic.
I'm not on the committee though. I'm just here to ask questions about that one topic when it comes up. Thank you.
That's great. And also, just for the record, Dr. Shields is here. Dr. Hines is here. Our counsel, Howard Miller, is here. Rachel Galiar is here in spirit. I see her icon and her mic is off. Okay, Dr. Shields, could you open the meeting, please?
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. The agenda that you have for today's meeting references on the first item, the minutes of this past month. Those minutes are available to you as backup in case anyone wants to refer to them. Item 1.2 is a personnel update. We've had a number of notices given to the district about changes in administrators. Let me walk you through them. The daily principal is retiring effective February 1st. The assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and assessment is retiring at some point early in May. A Weber assistant principal is leaving the district to become a principal in another district. That's beginning February 1st. Those three positions have been advertised and posted, and we have timelines set up for recruitment for those vacancies. In addition to that, we've also posted the new administrator for curriculum instruction and assessment. And the hope is there that we can fill that position by some point in the middle of February. The school board has accepted already 12 teacher retirements at the last board meeting. And principals and directors are preparing their staffing for the 2022-23 school year. What they do is they make recommendations to us here in central office. We review them, and then we present those changes, if warranted, to the school board as part of the budget process that we will work on with Ms. O'Hara. Any questions about any of that? Ms. Brooks.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. Can you give us an idea of where you are advertising and posting for the daily principal, the assistant superintendent of curriculum, the Weber AP? That's my first question. Because we usually we try to discuss that when we know that there are these, especially these big positions being filled, and in line with our vision and mission and our drive for diversity in the district. So if you could go over that. And then also, you mentioned the administrator for the curriculum instruction assessment is a new position. If either you or Dr. Hines would like to let the community know what that means.
Of course. So the daily principal and the Weber assistant principal, those two positions are posted internally in the district and also in an online application service called OLAS. That's a service that's hosted by BOCES, Putnam, Westchester BOCES specifically. And we get several applicants through that platform. The assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and assessment is posted not only internally and on OLAS, but we're also posting that in online periodicals such as Education Week, the American Association of School Administrators, and a few other platforms that Dr. Hines and I have identified for the more national perspective, so we can get applicants from across the country to hopefully consider coming to Port Washington. Dr. Hines, do you want to expand either on that or on the new position?
Yes, I do. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, so for those who are tuning in, they're probably like, why is there an exodus of administrators? And I'm saying that tongue in cheek, of course. The reality is, you know, we have two highly skilled, incredible administrators, educators who have been in port for a very long time, and they have other opportunities. So what we are doing is looking at this. It's not even about making lemonade out of lemons. We're using this as an opportunity to grow and to particularly grow the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. I've said this many times publicly, so I feel comfortable saying it again. We have different offices here, or different arms, I'll say, of district office. We have the HR arm where Dr. Shields is. We have Ms. Fennick, who's also there. We have the business office. Anybody who's been in district office understands that's about half of district office, the back end of the office, and rightfully so, with all the supports. The same thing for special education. Again, for those of us who have been to the annex, lots of supports there. But when it comes to curriculum and instruction, there really hasn't been much support. So therefore, with Dr. Mioli retiring and helping us transition to find somebody, I think W asked, you know, what type of search are we doing for that position? It's incredibly important to this board, certainly to us, that we find the best candidate, and we do a nationwide search. So that's what we're doing. And I feel very, very positive about that. But there hasn't been a lot of supports there. The curriculum instruction and assessment, especially with everything that we're doing, pushing our district forward, different edges, a lot of our district goals have to do with curriculum instruction. So therefore, we're looking to include an extra layer of support, which is what Dr. Shields spoke about before, which is the administrator for curriculum instruction and assessment. This will help us move forward, especially during a time of significant transition, albeit during a pandemic. And I think we will find, actually strike that, I know we will find two very capable and I believe incredible educators to move our district forward. So that's where we are. And then of course, you know, Mr. Saccone, who's an incredible assistant principal at Weber, he just had a wonderful offer as a principal in a somewhat neighboring district. So Chris and I are going to be very busy come January when we come back after the break. But we're looking at this as great opportunities for growth.
Thank you. Does anybody on the committee have any questions or comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. So next is item 1.3, attendance.
Yes, so the way we left that topic at our last meeting was that I was bringing that policy to the principals. The committee had put it into a place where they were comfortable. Now it was time to get feedback from the principals who have to enforce the attendance policy. So I met with all 7 of them, and they had some minor edits that are included in your packet. I'll give you some of the highlights if that's helpful, Ms. Brooks. So for example, on page 1, they changed a little bit of the order of the bullets to try and cluster them together in ways that are more connected. And for example, in bullet 3, a meeting will be held at the beginning of each school year to emphasize the importance of the attendance policy. That was more specific in that in the original draft that was going to be about having a meeting solely dedicated to that. Their thinking was that this is something where they could highlight this at an HSA or a PTA meeting and not have parents come out for just one topic, that it would be folded into other business that's done at the school level. On page 2, unexcused ATEDs in paragraph 2, we had a conversation around, in the draft, there was language where visiting relatives was considered an unexcused absence. We removed the word relatives from the list because there's some circumstances where there might be a relative that you need to go visit who is ailing, and we didn't want that to be, written specifically as something that a student couldn't do. So it gives the principal a little bit more latitude in that. Moving on to the third page, attendance incentives. You may recall that there were 3 bullets of different forms of incentives. We had an interesting conversation around that. And remember, this committee had the question that I brought back to Mr. Miller: do we need the language around incentives, since it was written in the NYSBA draft? So we brought back to the principals that yes, we do need some language in there, and let's work with the examples that we were given from the NYSBA policy and see how we might want to morph them. So they did keep one of the examples that they thought would be helpful. They didn't see the other 2 examples as something that philosophically the district wanted to lock into, even though the language was just, for example. It wasn't saying you had to do. So you see there that these incentives should not come at the expense of attending school when ill and risking the spread of illness. Recognition will be provided for perfect or improved attendance. That was language that they thought made good sense to include. I think going on to the 4th page, in the 4th paragraph, we spoke about how it's important that whether a child is absent for an excused absence or an unexcused absence, they would still be expected to make up work that was missed. But that it was when they had an excused absence, they were guaranteed the opportunity to make up all tests and missed work. And when something is unexcused, that's not guaranteed, but it would be encouraged. And it all depends on the circumstances of why a student is absent. So that gives the teacher some latitude there on how they would allow students to make up work, whether it's an excused absence or not an excused absence. So those were the highlights of the edits. And of course, I open up any questions if there are any.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Ms. Marconia, no. Dr. Block, no. Okay, I have, first of all, thank you for acknowledging students who would be visiting relatives, ailing, elderly. I think incredibly important during the past couple of years we've seen, but in general, also important. So I appreciate the compassion involved in that and the thought behind that. I still have concern on the incentives language that you mentioned on page 3. And my concern is going forward, and I don't know if this is in a regulation or not, but we don't want there to be incentives, as I said at the very beginning of this discussion, maybe even last year, that there will be a raffle for perfect attendance, or somebody will win a bicycle, or we'll have where students are rewarded in a way that is not, which we're trying to achieve equity, right? And equality. So I just want to make sure that this will prevent such what I think are abuses of incentive programs. I don't know if Mr. Miller has any concern about that, or you, Dr. Shields, or Dr. Hines, whether it belongs in here, almost like one thing is okay, but there are certain things that we just do not want to happen in our school district. How do we cover that in policy in the appropriate way?
So I'll share with you the tone of the conversation. The reason the other 2 bullets were eliminated was because they were much more outward facing in celebration and, having assemblies and things like that. So the principal said, there's a place for acknowledging a student's improvement. But we don't want to make this about, assemblies and raffles as you're describing. They said, hey, well, let's acknowledge it, but not do it in a way that's, highly visible. Because in the end of the day, students need to be absent for good reasons. And we don't want to hold that against them.
I do understand that. I'm still worried that long after I'm gone, from this position anyway. And we're traveling down the road another 5, 10, 15 years before this policy comes back up for review, given the sequence that we seem to be seeing these policies and, 10, 20, 15 years later. Is there something simple we can put in there to underscore the philosophy that we don't advocate giving prizes, or I'm stuck on it because I just don't know how to word it. I have my thought in my head, but I'm not sure what the right words are, the cautionary words. There's an overview, an overarching policy. We're not going to give material rewards or to a specific student. It is, Mr. Miller, is there a way
You
to
could say it just like that.
no material reward shall be given or considered, or how would?
Yeah, I mean, I could play around with some language and see what some other districts have in their policies to that effect.
Is everybody okay with that? It's just my thought, but
No, I'm completely, I was submitting to, I thought the way Chris introduced this was that Howard thought that we were required to include this incentives clause. I have a lot of problems with it. Even if it's not a material thing, it could be extra recess. It's still, I still don't love the practice in general.
well, I know we're required by regulation, because this went to Mr. Miller to say, do we need to require this because of the regulations that, according to NISBA, say we need to have something to incentivize attendance. So I don't know how we get around that regulation. My concern is, what do we consider an appropriate incentive, and an incentive that is not appropriate, much the way we outlined what we thought were appropriate excused absences and absences that are not excused. I know what other districts have done, and I really want to avoid some of those practices here. So, for example, giving a child, it never occurred to me, recess is not monetary, but giving one child additional recess or additional privileges because of the attendance, and not and basically harming other children, or it's I want to protect that philosophy. Dr. Bloch?
Yeah, so I think the challenge here is we just need to find a really small prize. I'm confident that we can do that. May I recommend a pencil? Pencil would be something that no kid is going to be like, oh yeah, I'll come to school for it because I really want to get that pencil at the end of the year. But I think it would meet the regulatory mandate. I'm sure there are other options, but I don't think we have to overcomplicate this. I think things that have to do with time, in other words, like special privileges, I think that makes teachers' lives more complicated when they have to split up classes.
I saw a hand raised, and is it Ms. Bays?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I'm confused why we're asking this. I guess do we know that that we've had an issue that we're trying to change? I mean, we have celebrated attendance in the school district just by at the middle school, for instance, and at the high school, I believe we give recognition for perfect attendance. They get put on. So, I mean, I think we were told by Dr. Shields that the principals reviewed this and felt comfortable with the wording that about the incentives and what they put in as the incentive. So I don't know why we're like, how do we know that there's a problem? I guess, I mean, have there been students who've gotten recess and awards? Like I feel like we're saying that we have this issue. How do we know?
It's not a matter of whether we have the issue. It's a matter of the fact that we don't agree with it as a philosophy.
I know, but I'm saying we don't have an issue. Like, we're not trying to, so the principals have told us that they would support that wording. Why do we think that wording is not acceptable is my question.
because we don't agree with the philosophy of incentives.
But there are no incentives in the policy, correct?
The policy leaves open the possibility that there will be a teacher who will, as I said, this has to go right. This has to go beyond this existing group of people here making this determination.
So then
for
why don't we
future
add
boards.
this? So then why don't we add what exactly Mr. Miller said? Add in the policy that there will be no individual, incentive or awards given for individuals. I mean, but again, so are we going to also now be saying that we no longer recognize perfect attendance at the award ceremonies? Because that has happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been historically, even back in
But
the
I
day
guess
when I
we're
went to
not
school.
going to do that.
Yeah, you'd get a little certificate or acknowledgement.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
so I just want to go through the steps that we went through. So originally we had a draft policy that had no language of incentives in it. And that's where we all stood philosophically, right? We went back to Mr. Miller, who said, and it was at the direction of this committee that we wanted to check to see if we needed the incentive language in there because NISBA said we did. So Mr. Miller said, yes, we do. Let's follow that and let's put it in. So what we did is we put in language to the minimal level.
Yep.
Because we knew where the committee fell on this, and your principals feel the same way about it. So I think the language that's in there, recognition will be provided for perfect or improved attendance. That could be as minimal as a pencil, as Dr. Block said, or it could be a fist bump in the hallway. It doesn't have to be anything grand. And I think the language is saying we will acknowledge improved or perfect attendance. It doesn't say how we're going to do it because the principles are in alignment with what this committee believes.
Right. So, and you're right, and it gives flexibility. And I think the concern about giving anything with a cash value would be covered in other policies or just by law, that you're not giving kids checks for getting good grades or perfect attendance. That would be unlawful.
But offering extra recess, or I'm
I
glad
don't know.
are
I'm
in
sorry.
line with our philosophy, but I think that my concern, and I won't beat the dead horse if this is something the committee doesn't agree with, but my concern at the very beginning, when the NISBA template had examples of material things that could be given to the kids, I said, this is not what we want as a district. And thinking forward, this group of people is not always going to be here as this group of people. And as more principals come on, and as more teachers come on, and more administrators come on, and different board members, I'm hoping that our philosophy will be really reflected in this, and to say that no special privileges can be something to let future people understand. Our philosophy is we do not want special privileges given to kids because of their attendance.
So why don't we add that? No special privileges will be given for attendance. So how about that? Like if that's okay and that makes it, but just remember everybody that just like we as a board go through policies every year and make changes. When you're gone, Deb, there may be a board that says, no, we want to incentivize. So, that doesn't mean like this, nothing is etched in forever now.
Of course, but at least they'll have some language that they can go.
And we've seen language and we've changed it.
And this is 20 years old. So it may be another 20, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
It may be another 20 years. So Howard, Mr. Miller, if you could just guide us in a little bit of language.
I'll talk to Chris offline, but I think the language you have is good. We could just add one or two words that address your concern.
Okay, unless anybody has strenuous objections.
No, I'm happy to see something modified. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. So we will await your additional comments, Mr. Miller. Thank you. Okay, any questions on the attendance policy, or shall we move on to item 1.4? Okay, great. We can move on, Dr. Shields. Thank you.
So 1.4 is policy 5021 that also has a regulation attached to it. Mr. Miller is here to answer questions of the committee members, but I also wanted to update the committee. One of the tasks that was given last month was that I was to work with the technology office to see if I could make more visible on the website who our Title IX officer is. And that is Ms. Fennick. So any reference to her specifically in policies has been removed, but it has been made visible on our website under the Human Resources tab, which is where if someone has an issue related to something like this is where they would go to. So it's under there as its own heading as Title IX officer, and it's also been added to her name and title under the HR section as well, to make that crystal clear. So Ms. Brooks, I know Ms. Malconian had some questions for Mr. Miller. And I know there was that community comment that was made last month that we wanted to make sure Mr. Miller addressed as well. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So Ms. Malconian, just so the community understands, in advance of this meeting, I asked Ms. Malconian to forward her questions to Mr. Miller so he could be prepared to answer them here and not be caught by a surprise. We can have efficiency during the meeting. So Ms. Malconian, if you want to present your questions to Mr. Miller, we can proceed that way as a start.
Thank you. I did not number my pages still, so forgive me. But my first question, as I indicated to you, Howard, is on page 8.
What is the wording on top of page 8, just so we can be sure we're all on the same page? Because what I see on the top of page 8 is emergency removal and administrative leave. I'm looking at the PDF. I have 8 of 18 pages.
No, I have 1, 2, hold on. 3. Oh, sorry, 7. Sorry, I miscounted. Yes, emergency removal and administrative leave.
Okay,
Forgive me, I was on page 9. In the middle of the page, filing a formal complaint. The first paragraph, second sentence, the complainant must be participating in or attempting to participate in the education program or activity of the district at the time of filing the complaint. So my concern is that students who did not find the wherewithal to file a complaint during their participation, are they going to be precluded from filing post-participation? I'm concerned about that.
So if, let's say, a former student contacted the district and said, I was harassed by a present teacher, we would certainly take that complaint. I don't think it would be processed the same way, but we would certainly investigate that complaint, because if you did, as you're seeing in a school district in Suffolk County, several students, former students, have come forward making allegations, and those allegations are certainly being investigated, because if you do have a staff member that has been in the past sexually harassing students, and those students at the time, understandably, because it happens, don't feel comfortable coming forward, you're certainly going to investigate those complaints. And in some cases, you may make reports to the state about those complaints, and in some cases, you'll bring in law enforcement about those complaints. So it wouldn't be processed the same way as Title IX. And if you're seeing in the school district out in Suffolk, the legal counsel is doing that investigation. It's not being done by a Title IX coordinator. And that's how you would do it here. Sainan, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Does that mean that we shouldn't have this language in here if it's.
No, the language is fine. This is just for a Title IX complaint. And just as an aside, so a lot of this comes out of the regs that were developed by the Trump administration. In April, apparently we're going to get some new regs that are going to undo a lot of this. But in the meantime, if you had a former student that came forward, you would investigate that and you would treat that with the utmost seriousness.
Okay. Do I keep going, Deb, or what would you?
That's why we have Mr. Miller here, so plow ahead.
Okay. At the bottom of page 8, the last paragraph, the last sentence, in fact, when a formal complaint is filed, the Title IX coordinator must send a written notice of allegations to all parties, which includes the identities of all known parties. So as I wrote there, I'm concerned about the confidentiality of the complainant.
So the record of the complaint really doesn't go anywhere. That's kept confidential. You're not publicizing who made the complaint. But in order to do a proper investigation, you do have to know who the complainant is. It's not like this is going to be broadcast anywhere. It can't be. It's still protected under the FERPA regs.
Okay. Thank you. Keep going, unless other more questions.
I don't see anybody's hand raised, so I'll interrupt you if I see that somebody on the panel has a question or comment.
On to page 10. At the top, it says investigation of a formal complaint. In that first paragraph, in the middle of the paragraph, the district may also outsource all or part of investigation to appropriate third parties. So I was just wanting to know who those third parties could be.
Typically, your outside legal counsel, or in some cases of severe child abuse, you may want to bring on an outside investigator, perhaps depending on the gravity of it, you may want someone out of the special victims unit of a district attorney's office, former. So those are things you don't want to hamstring yourself, depending on the nature of the allegations.
Okay, thank you. Page 12. Under hearings and determination regarding responsibility.
Mhm.
The middle of the first paragraph, a decision maker can either be a district employee or where appropriate, a third party. Who are our district decision makers?
So these regulations, unfortunately, were really designed for higher education institutions. And they wanted to stop a model where the person doing the investigation was also making recommendations, also making decisions. In the school district setting, there are statutory protections to staff and students. So if a student is being accused of sexually harassing another student, and you wanted to suspend that student, we would typically go to an education law 3214 hearing, commonly known as a superintendent's hearing. And in Port Washington, what you've done is have an outside hearing officer conduct the hearing and make findings of facts and a recommendation that would be reviewed by the superintendent of schools. If a teacher is being accused of sexual harassment and it's a tenured teacher, you would have to go through the 3020A process. And if it was a civil service employee, we would follow the procedures under the civil services law. because they're public employees, they get statutory protections.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for that, for this section of materials. My other question was from another document.
Okay, any questions or comments on this document? I don't see any hands raised. At the end of this document, was it at the end of this document? No, okay, I thought the regulations were here, but I'm thinking of the other document. So the question I have now is, having heard Mr. Miller say there were going to be new regulations in April. Mr. Miller, what do you suggest we do with this policy now that we've just gone through all of this? Do we put it on for a first read?
I would suggest that you go forward with the policy,
Okay,
because the government says something's going to happen in April doesn't mean it's going to happen in April.
okay,
Because when they say April, that even though they're saying 2022, that could be April 2024. But I would still go forward with it, but I would just have in the back of your mind that these may change. And with that in the back of your mind, as we go through individual cases, we can be mindful of having a little bit more flexibility than maybe in these regs.
Deb,
I am
forgive
going to
me.
rely, I'm sorry.
I didn't answer question 1 on my list. I'm
Okay.
a little ahead of myself. Can I go back?
Of course.
The
Tell us where you are on the document.
first page, the title, the actual title. That's why I got into the weeds already. So my question was, the first sentence describes this as free from discrimination and harassment. So my thought was whether or not the title of this document should read Title IX, Sex Discrimination and Harassment, so that people understood that there was more to the document than just sex discrimination.
It says that now. It says Title IX,
Oh.
it says harassment and sex discrimination, not sex discrimination and harassment. Are you saying the order should be changed?
Oh, am I looking at an old title?
I believe you are.
Okay.
Dr. Shields, correct me if I'm wrong, but the current version we have on the very first, let me just go back to board doc, the very first document we have, it's 1,289 KBs, whatever that stands for, says Title IX, harassment and sex discrimination.
Yes, that was a recommendation by this committee to change the title at a recent meeting. And Ms. Lister, that's the way we have the most current draft, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, I had suggested that last time, so I didn't realize that change got made. Forgive me. Thank you.
Can I just also clarify, Ms. Lister, we're also having an exhibit with this, which is the complaint form, correct?
That's right. And it was recommended that the regulations be deleted or removed.
Yeah, we're no longer having the regulations because they're folded into the policy itself. But we did feel the need to have the exhibit exist, so the complaint form, which originally was in the regulation, could stand on its own.
Yes, and currently the complaint form and the appeal form are attached to what was the regulation. That hasn't been changed yet. They haven't been divorced yet. So when they get divorced, I guess it'll be policy 5021-E for exhibit.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
Okay, great. Mr. Miller, I will rely on you to let us know if, come whichever April it is, if there's anything significant that needs to be done to this policy, because I imagine by then we will have adopted the policy.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Thank you.
And once they come out, in all likelihood, we'll be holding webinars that we'll invite you to.
Okay, thank you. So before we move on, any objection to putting this on for a first read? Seeing none. Okay, great. We'll put this on for a first read in January. The next item on the agenda is 1.5. Dr. Shields?
Yes, item 1.5 is 9020.1 8.1, sexual harassment prevention, there was a question that was going to be asked of Mr. Miller, looking specifically at a paragraph on page 2, paragraph 3, I believe there was some wording that was in question.
Yeah.
Ms. Buchanan, that's you again.
I think maybe it's paragraph 4. Sexual harassment can also occurs. We weren't sure what was intended there.
So if you're talking about can also occur when a person in authority tries to trade job benefits for sexual favors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's known as the quid pro quo sexual harassment. So in the work context, you'd see it, you want a promotion, you need to have sex with me. You want me to recommend you for whatever, you need to have sex with me.
No, I understand. I understand the intent of the language. We weren't sure if it's supposed to say can also occur or can occur.
Or occurs.
Right.
Or
occur.
are we
Right,
saying
hold
it definitively occurs or it can occur?
Okay, hold on, let me just find that again. I just lost it.
It looks like there's just an extra S there.
Can also, oh yeah, it's right. It's just a typo. Can also occur.
Not to be illegal, but
Okay.
does it occur when a person in authority tries to trade job benefits for, I mean, is it a fact or is it can also? In other words, you hear the nuance can also occur or can occur versus occurs definitively. Does it legalistically, does it matter?
Well, I think you're trying to say, going back to the prior paragraph, I think you're saying this is also a form of sexual harassment. So I think, yeah, if we had a straight up quid pro quo situation, we would say that's sexual harassment.
So we just delete the S from occurs
Yeah.
to fix it. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Block, I see none. Okay, so that said, this will go on for a first read in January as well. Now we did, just to tie in, we had a community comment at the last meeting. And the question was, because we're on these two policies, I'll just go into that question now so we can stay with the topic. The question was asked whether sexual abuse and sexual violence are covered in policy 5021. I'm sorry, so I should have done this item 1.4. So we were going to ask Mr. Miller.
So yes, so
Either in 5021 or someplace else.
So it is sexual, so certainly a sexual assault, sexual abuse by a staff member of a child are all forms of sexual harassment that are covered by this policy. But they're also covered by other policies. So if a staff member was sexually abusing a child, that would cover by your policy on child abuse in an educational setting. And you would have to follow those procedures, which would include a written referral to law enforcement. So it would simultaneously be a Title IX violation, but also trigger other things. It could also be a DASA violation. If it's student on student, it would violate your code of conduct. So these things, it is sexual harassment, but it also triggers other obligations.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee on that? Okay, so without objection, that policy will go on for a first read. We move on to item 1.6, which is school board powers and duties. Dr. Shields?
Yes, this policy came back to committee. You may recall there was a conversation at the last school board meeting where I believe Mr. Smith had a question around this either policy or attached exhibit.
Yes, and since Mr. Smith is here, and Mr. Miller, we brought you in to, well, why don't we have Mr. Smith voice his concern, since you were the person in the best position to do that. And we'll
Sure.
consider you a
Thank
community comment right now. No,
Okay.
consider you a board member, obviously, but
Consider it what I guess we consider it whatever we want.
no, you're a board, but we'll
Yeah.
bring you in to.
Great, thanks for having me. Mr. Miller, I was just a little bit concerned about this policy from the standpoint of, and I understand that we do have some version of it currently, although I think the one we have is quite broad. Right, when we make a policy, it's effectively like I guess a regulation. So when we make a policy, it should be for a specific, I guess, regulatory purpose or policy in the district. I'm reading this, and it's basically going on to describe a list of examples of powers and authorities that the school board has, make some general statements as to how the school board should, for lack of a better word, behave. And I'm just trying to understand, being that the school board has authority, given by law and restrictions under law, why we need to make a policy that says anything other than the school board has the power. The school board will do everything that's required of it by law. The school board will only do what it's permitted to do by law, and the school board won't do anything that's not permitted by law. And that's my question is, like, why are we trying to define all of these powers and authorities and make this list when you go through the list in the exhibit, and I could think of 10 more things, and I could look at any of these items and say, oh, maybe this shouldn't be here. So I'm just trying to understand, like, what we're, from a regulatory standpoint, what we're accomplishing.
So you're correct that the school boards have statutory authority that's laid out in the education law. And then there's a catch-all provision in the education law that gives you implied authority to do things. This policy is very standard in pretty much every school district. It serves as a guidepost and a list of examples of what your authorities are. It's not meant to be all-inclusive. It's just saying, here, school board members, here's the basics of what you do, and it gives the community examples of what your powers and authorities are. But it's not meant to be all-inclusive, and I don't view you as being hamstrung by listing these things because you have implied authority under the education law.
So, but I guess my question is still the same, right? And I guess notwithstanding that other districts have it, we're making a policy. And what you're saying is that it's actually not policy, it's just informational. So I'm just wondering why we wouldn't put it in an informational place. Yeah.
Policies serve as guideposts for you. Okay, so that's why you have. Okay, so that's why you have policies. There are only a small handful of required policies that districts are required by law to have, but you have other policies that are not required by law to have, to set forth what the guidelines are and what governs your district. So this policy, it helps govern your district and list what your expectations are for board members.
Right. Yeah, I'm just not. I'm only one person, so I guess it doesn't have. I'm not the only one who have to convince me. Yes, we have other policies that aren't required by law, but those are policies that the school board generally is making in order to, enforce policy and to enforce our philosophy on how to reward kids who are, have perfect attendance, as an example, right? We're trying to make rules. We're not trying to make a rule here. We're just trying to kind of lay out, like, for who, for the community, for ourselves? Like,
I think it's
I'm just not
both.
understanding what the policy is we're making. Yeah.
So I think it's both. You are saying these are the expectations for you without having to say, see education law 1701, ... You're laying it out for you and for the public without being overly lawyerly and referring to statutes. And again, I don't view this as hamstringing you.
I guess I would feel more comfortable if we said that in the policy. Very
So
specific, very explicitly.
What do you, I want you to elaborate. Said what very specifically that,
Oh, what Howard just said. This
You want
doesn't.
me to add, for example, there is a specific provision of the education law that
Well,
we
what I'm
can-
concerned
we
about
can-
is that the regular person, I'm concerned that the regular person, the everyday person who's reading this would understand the conversation that we just had, that this
Yeah,
is just a, like, and I don't, that's what's not clear in this,
So
right?
I can take from
Yeah.
actual statute and say you have such other powers that may be necessary to run your district. So no one will,
Yeah. Or what if we just said this is only meant to be a guidepost and specifically doesn't limit any authority of the school board? You're the lawyer, but
right,
that's what I would
right.
feel
So
more comfortable
you
is
have,
that somebody who opens this policy knows from the start that this is not any sort of limitation. It's just a North Star.
we could do that. That has that. So no one could say, well, your policy doesn't say specifically you can order food, so you can't. That's a little facetious, but some other thing that, well, it's not listed in your policy, so you can't do it. We can put
Right.
that, I don't know if disclaimer is the right word, but maybe a caveat that.
Yeah, or
this
vice
is
versa,
just-
that or even, exactly.
Right, so we can put that in, so
I'm just
community
concerned that
members-
somebody reading this could use it against a future trustee.
Yeah. So we could put in that catch-all, that this is not the be-all, end-all of all the things that you can do, and if it's not in here, you're prohibited from doing it. We could add something like that.
And vice versa, right? And also that if it says, that I'm just making an example. I think it says that the board shall concern itself primarily with broad questions of policy and appraisal of results. I wouldn't want to see people getting into a multi-hour conversation about what is, a broad question of policy and what
Right.
isn't a broad question of policy, right? This shouldn't be a document that anybody, whether it's a administrator, a trustee, or a community member, could hold up to a school board member and say, what are you doing? You're going outside of this document, because the school board can act within can act within the confines of the
You
law,
can,
in my opinion.
and school boards also
Yeah.
can waive their own policies.
Right.
And-
But you would need the board to waive it, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
that's correct. You would need the board to waive it, but yeah, I understand what you're concerned about. I do.
Okay, that's all.
And I have, here in board and then in other places, see community members try to waive a policy at the board, and it's frustrating.
That's what I want to avoid.
Yeah, and we can deal with that. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Deb.
of course. The last line that says complete and final authority on all district educational matters, et cetera, except as restricted by law. Mr. Smith, that still doesn't satisfy you. I'm sensing that the first line of the second paragraph concerns you in addition to the other things you said. So I just want to make sure that Mr. Miller, so that we really can move forward with this policy and everybody feels comfortable with it. I don't need a unanimous vote, but I do want everybody to be heard. And I just want to be sure that you're satisfied that you have been heard and understood.
Yeah, I'm satisfied based on what Mr. Miller just said, that he understood what my concern is. And, I guess whatever comes out in the next version of the first read, like we all say, I'm only one of 7 votes, and, I will certainly vote for it if that concern is addressed, and, all others should vote their conscience.
Okay, so next, does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry, any questions or comments before okay, Dr. Shields, so do we put this on for a first read with Mr. Miller's revisions? Or do we want to, or suggestions, do we want to bring it back here in January and then put on for a first read. I'm comfortable personally with Mr. Miller tweaking it. We put it up on board docs for the public to see and the rest of the board to see during first read. But I will defer to whatever you think.
If the committee is okay with it not coming back to committee, we can put it up for first read after Mr. Miller makes some edits to it.
Committee members. Dr. Block, Ms. Melkonian, everybody okay with that? Yes, thumbs up. Great.
Yes.
So we'll tweak, we'll put up on board docs so everybody can see, and it'll be on for first read, hopefully in January. Mr. Miller, if you can get to it by then, that's great.
Yes, I can. Thank
We
you.
understand. It's crazy time of year. Okay, so let me close that out, and we will move on to item 1.7 grading policy.
Yes, so at our last meeting, we discussed creating a grading policy because we don't currently have one. So the guidance that was given to me was to take a look at the NISBA policy, along with some other some other policies that are currently in place in other districts. So SIOSIT was one of those policies. And Cindy, what was the second one that we looked at as well?
Manhasset, Scarsdale, Jericho.
Manhasset, Jericho, Syosset, Scarsdale. Those are all on
I
board
believe it was
docs.
Scarsdale specifically.
Yes, but I recall there were two that were preferred. And so I took the two that were preferred and I worked that through into the NISBA policy. And what you have in front of you is a draft of that. This is the first time you're seeing it. I have also shared it with Dr. Mioli, and I shared it with our secondary principals along with Ms. Ferrante. And, you know, feedback from Dr. Mioli is that it is good in general in scope. And Dr. Pernick feels that it doesn't change any current practice, but sets the clear tone for what grading is about. And that it's really at the high school where grade changes really happen, if they happen at all. It's very rare that they do happen, according to Dr. Pernick. But he feels that this still gives him latitude to work with teachers if there's a grade that's in question.
Thank you. I have questions, but I would like to defer to my committee members if you have any questions or comments. First of all, I'm very excited about this. I know this is something that I've been looking forward to since I've actually been a parent in the community, and I'm actually very happy to see it coming to fruition while I am on the board. So I thank everybody for their input. Dr. Block.
Yeah, so on this, is there anything in this policy, and I asked because I didn't see it, but I might have missed it, that requires that teachers basically keep some kind of grade book, some kind of official methodology for grading that they have, and then a book of the grades that, you know, if there is an issue, that the grade book would be basically the record of that the student got a 85 on a quiz and a 75 in class participation or something like that?
The draft you have does not include language like that. That is more specific language that would typically appear in a regulation than would appear in a policy. The guidance I felt that I got from the committee was to keep it broad in nature at this stage, and that if we wanted to become more specific in the future, I believe that was connected to the equity and inclusion work, that we would become more specific in the future. So for right now, it does not include that specificity.
So Dr. Shields, you mentioned like a regulation. So my understanding of the policies is that these are the regulations. There's no like federal sub-regulatory guidance and things like that. Like this is the be all and end all, correct? Or is there some other level of policy?
if from other parts of our board policy manual, you would see that sometimes there's a regulation that is designed by administration that goes with a policy. Sometimes there's also an exhibit that goes with a policy, but that the board has an obligation to create a policy that is more philosophical and broad-based in statement. And then if a regulation is created by administration, it would accompany the board policy. I believe what you're referring to is like a regulation in the form of a law that Howard was talking about
Right.
earlier. I'm talking about more regulation for practice here in the district.
Okay, so I would, so, you know, in my university and all the universities I've worked in, like, we basically have to keep grade books, and our chairman collects them and never looks at them because there's generally not a problem. But should there be a problem, the grade book actually exists and can be a record of that. And with things getting more competitive, particularly at the high school level, and you know, whether somebody gets an A or an A plus or a B plus, you know, or a C matters a whole lot to some people. I think there's value. And I would imagine that 99 to 100% of teachers are already doing this, but it doesn't seem to me that it would be a big deal to require some form of grade book.
Isn't this though, kids, like as a parent, we go into the portal, isn't it all there?
Yeah. Can I just ask a question? So Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines, we have now implemented Aspen for the entire school district. So Aspen does exist for the secondary level, has been used, and that is where all grades are recorded. So if you're a secondary student, you can absolutely always have access to your grades. But at the elementary level, it is not, and to Adam Smith's point, it has not been mandatory. So the question I think that is being raised, and I think it is being raised by Dr. Block and we've heard from community members. So my question is this: in our policy, it says the school district, or the proposed policy that you've put together, Dr. Shields, the school district will use a uniform grading system. Is there a way that we can say or add the school district will use a uniform grading system and all grades will be recorded in the, you know, system that the school district is using at the time? So for today, and to Deborah's point, for the boards down the line, and where today we're using Aspen, I don't know, down the line, we may be using another system. So what, instead of being specific and saying, and all grades will be recorded in Aspen, is there a way to put the wording to say, and all those grades will be recorded in a timely fashion on our, you know, grading system that is being currently used? I don't know, I'm making up the wording, but is there something that we can do in that sense, which would not be regulatory per se, because I understand the distinction, but just in a general way, and then how they're doing it or what system we're using, that would then be the regulation, right? That would be more the going down the line. So do you understand my question? And I guess I'm asking Dr. Shields, and I think I'm summing up what Adam, you were saying and what we've heard in the past, but that was my 2 cents.
I think you're looking for language that says something like grades will be recorded, right? Will be recorded in a place for teacher, student, and parent access, something like that.
Something to that effect, yes. And I think it should, and you know, I think it should just maybe also say something about in a timely fashion. I don't know that we have to say what timely is, right? But you know, I just think that if we can just somehow, since we are putting this policy in place and we have heard that there is that request, or just if we could address that issue as well.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, there are students whose teachers post very, very quickly, and there are teachers who will not post quickly. The assignments may have been graded, and in Aspen you can see the individual. You're supposed to be able to see the individual assignments, not just the cumulative grade in the class, but each individual assignment, homework, quizzes, tests, writing, whatever it happens to be. And even though something may have been graded and the student has gotten that grade back in the classroom, it hasn't been uploaded to Aspen. And so I think for the idea of uniformity also goes with the equity, that I don't know how you define timely, but to get some consistency so that students across classrooms, grade levels, buildings have, and parents have the opportunity to view how their child is progressing in more real time than not real time. Obviously, it can't be instantaneous, but I think that's really a valid and legitimate concern, because these inconsistencies are happening, classroom to classroom, building to building.
I understand.
Okay, great. Any other comments?
Deborah, do you mind if I jump in with a point of clarification? Because
Can Dr. Hines, I'll defer to you whether Ms. Gilliard can go.
No, yeah, no, Rachel, go ahead. I'll go after Rachel, no problem.
it's totally okay. I didn't mean to cut you. I didn't see you. Are you sure? Go ahead. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page in the terminology that we're using and what we think we're referring to. So I haven't experienced the high school as a parent, so I'll defer to the people who have. But in my experience, not all teachers are using the grading system in exactly the same way. And so I'm not a member of the committee. I'm not going to jump in with an opinion, but there are teachers at Weber who use Aspen to post the final grade for the quarter, the final grade for each quarter, and nothing else. And there are teachers who use Aspen and post the final grade for the quarter, but also post all the individual assignments that go into that grade as they happen with the grade for those assignments, which allows both a child and a parent to look as the quarter goes on and understand where they stand heading towards that final grade. So my suggestion is just that the committee discuss the clarity of language in this policy and what the goal is that we want to be encouraging, because those are two different things and two different uses of the grading system. And do we want to make sure that it is one, or do we want to leave it as it is right now and there's a great variety? So I'm just throwing out there for the committee to discuss.
Dr. Hines?
So I have three things. I think we have to be careful not to get too much into the weeds with this. That's my first, it's not a warning. It's just something to strongly consider when it comes to grading. The second is I think we all understand this because we either have young kids or we've had young kids at some point. There are some subtle and not so subtle and very nuanced types of grades for our primary school kids, and it's vastly different than what our middle school and even intermediate third, fourth, and fifth grade and high school kids. And I think to Dr. Block's point, and I totally agree, I would say 99.9% have some sort of grading book, whether it's physical and or it's electronic. And then the third point is these are discussions I believe we would have to have, because it's a change of practice, with our administrators and certainly teachers. Not to say that we shouldn't do this. I'm just saying I think there's a couple different layers here before, let's say a policy is cobbled together and moved forward and approved. I just want to make sure that those conversations take place too. So I just wanted to just put that out there.
Hit the wrong button, sorry. Dr. Hines, are you saying you would want this concept to, are you saying that you wouldn't want the committee to put into the policy that we wanted all grades for it? Let's just take the secondary level. Let's start with that, because the secondary level is so high stakes. That you wouldn't want to have something in the policy where grades for assignments are posted in a timely manner in addition to the final quarter grade?
Nope, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is if we're getting detailed as far as what we want to see within the policy, I believe those details should be discussed with the teachers and the administrators. Listen, one of the board's goals, and and I will say district goals, as we strive toward being a much better school district, has to do with being consistent, right? So that consistency is incredibly important. What's just as important is the way we go about making sure this consistency takes place in what we do. That's all I'm saying. So if there are certain things that, you know, district office and certainly the board are looking for to enable and to make sure these things are consistent, I'm just saying, let's define what those things are at some point, and then clearly, you know, Chris, myself, and others need to have these conversations. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I think a conversation will be had to see how we ensure the consistency within the policy going forward. I see Ms. Malconian shaking her head, yes. Ms. Bays?
I just want the committee
Oh,
to know that my goal today was to bring you a draft to start to look at.
Okay,
And that I always imagined that this would be something that would be brought back to our teacher leadership before it ever gets near a first reading. Just
Okay,
wanted
but
people to
I'm
know that.
sorry, I just want to add one more step to that. Before it gets to first reading, or even before it gets to teachers, I think we need to first take it back to the board, because this is only a committee meeting, so we need to get an agreement from the entire board that we want this policy, right? So we just have to add another step. So this committee needs to first make a recommendation to the Board of Education that they want this policy, and then what the next step should be. Okay, so I'm just adding an extra step.
but don't we go to the board with the actual language of the recommended policy? I thought.
Well, again, I guess it's a question of, do you want the administrators and the teachers spending time on a policy that the entire board doesn't agree should exist? If it doesn't agree, I don't know. So, I mean, I think it's a question of using our staff's time wisely and not having them work on something that may not be something that the entire board supports. I'm putting it, you know, your recommendation, but I'm giving you the best use of our staff's time, which we do know they have a lot going on.
Any comments?
So to piggyback on comments that both Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines made, am I hearing that we really get to flesh this out more through regulation that comes out of your office? Forgive me, the dog doesn't like something that's going on outside. So is that where we should be taking this, that more of the detail of, for example, the school district will use a uniform grading system? That seems fabulous, but that, I guess, the regulation would provide more detail of what that would mean. And does that make sense?
It can, if that's the direction we wanted to go in, yes.
Agreed. And I just want to be clear too, and if I wasn't before, this is a very important conversation. And there'll be more important conversations as we try to tighten up some things that we want to see tightened up. So whether we go through policy, whether we go through regulation, whether we go through PGCD, whatever avenue we choose to go through, we will go through them, and we will make sure that we are as consistent as possible. And again, as we define what those terms are that we're looking for, I just want to make sure I have the opportunity, as well as Chris and others, to have these conversations with those with those parties. But this is important for sure. And I think, listen, not to talk about the pandemic, as we're still in it, it shined a very large and bright light on some things that we need to address, and this is certainly one of them.
Oh, okay. Any other comments? Because now I'm not sure whether I should raise my comments to this policy, because I was under the impression that the committee was going to create a finalized policy to bring to the full board, to ask the board what they wanted. And I'm hearing something different now. So, Dr. Shields.
Deb, just to be clear, you are hearing the same exact thing. The committee needs to go back to the board and say, we have a proposed policy that we'd like to put in place. Are we all in agreement? And then the committee can then decide to send it to the staff to work out details with it and bring it back to the committee. I am saying before we get PGCD or any other committee of the staff or the teachers or the administrators looking and making recommendations, I think we should be all on the same page, that we are all in agreement that we need this policy. That's what I'm just talking. Am I not being clear?
You are, I just don't know what the next step should be with respect to the
It
comments.
should
that
go
I
to the
had.
board meeting. Okay, I don't know what your comments are, but it should go to the general board meeting on January 11th, and we should all give you the yay or nay to continue working on this policy.
So for clarification, does that mean any policy we discuss through this committee, we first have to go to the board to do the work and then we go back to policy and do the work?
I'm confused. What do you mean? You have to, any policy has to get approved by the entire board, right?
Correct, but you're asking us to go to the board with permission to work on this policy. We've not done that throughout the entire year so far.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Maybe I'm not being clear. I'm saying before the staff starts working on a policy, we should make sure the board is okay with it. Okay with having a policy. This is a brand new policy. We have not created this policy. It's not an adjustment to a policy. This is adding a policy that we have not had, which, I get the sense we all believe we should have, but this is not a full board meeting. So we need to make sure that we're all correct, all on the same page about it. And then we can ask staff to give us their recommendations on whether it's a regulation as far as where the timing is, or, where the information is kept, whether the staff believes they should be putting in assignments, or the conversation that Dr. Hines then said or suggested that the steps that he thought needed to be taken. That's my suggestion.
I don't know that I agree with the process, but for the sake of peace, we will bring it to the board in January to ask the full board, does everybody want a grading policy? Understanding that this draft is nowhere near finally discussed, tweaked, whether among committee members or the staff. And if the full board or a majority of the board agrees that this is a policy the district should have, because I know Dr. Hines said he wanted this policy back in the last meeting. When I asked the question, should we have this policy? And Dr. Hines said yes. And so we move forward. And then we'll come back to committee, and then I can ask my questions and spend more time on this policy. How's that for a plan? And anybody else can ask questions.
So, Deb, if I could just speak real quick. So
Sure.
I deeply appreciate the fact that we are engaging in this conversation, and I am not trying to stonewall this whatsoever. Not that I think anybody is thinking that. I think because it is potentially a change in practice, and it is potentially, or it has the potential to get into the weeds. I think there are other steps that we would have to do that I think initially we didn't think we had to do before. That's all I'm saying. But in the end, there will be, I think, a grading policy. And I just want to make sure that we do it the right way. And I think most, if not all of us, would agree the process is just as important as whatever final product that we do have. So I would, again, I think, to Dr. Shields' credit, right? So we have at least something at 30,000 feet. You kind of synthesize some other policies and other places, which is great. It's a good start. And I think, Deb, as you said, we're not close to being where it will be in the end, and understandably so. Yeah, and listen, and the next one, by the way, will be homework. Right, so that'll be another one, and I think the way we go about this is probably the same way we would tackle that as well.
So, Mr. Miller, how do I? This is not on for a first read. So, what do we call it, just bring it in for a discussion item at the full board meeting
Yes,
to discuss.
to discuss
simply,
whether you
do
want.
we
to-
want a policy?
Yes,
Okay. So Mr. Shields, we will put this onto the main board, the regular board meeting agenda in January. We will make all the board members aware of the fact this is coming on, not to discuss the specific language, but to discuss the ideal of, do we want a grading policy such as this? Does everybody agree with that? Okay, I see no dissent. Okay, so let's do that. Thank you. Okay, so we're on to item 1.8.
Yes, item 1.8, Ms. Brooks, I believe, was brought up at the last committee meeting. The question was going to be posed to Mr. Miller. I think you or another member of the committee were looking to ask the question about board standing committees and community time to speak, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that was Dr. Block, I believe, who raised this at the last committee meeting. Dr. Block, would you like to voice your concerns or ideas? You're muted.
Sorry, I missed a comment. Can you say it again, Dr. Shields?
Yes, so we're on item 1.8, which is the board standing committees. And at our last meeting, I'm sorry, flipping back in my notes, you had made a comment about under new business about the fact that there was nothing in this policy that addressed community comments during standing committee meetings. So there's nothing.
Right. Yeah, so my comment
facilities.
is that there should be consistency across, right? Like, we have a 3-minute limit on comments for board meetings. I think that is a reasonable limit. I think that has been effective. And I think that we should have the same for committee meetings. That's all.
So, Mr. Miller, is there a way that you would suggest, well, what we normally do, just as a practice in our committee meetings, is it's been understood that the community comments really are about the policies that we've been addressing during the meetings, during whether it was the committee meeting or work session, whatever it was, to address those specific policies. We don't have that at the general board, at the regular board meeting. At the regular board meeting, anybody can come up to the podium and say whatever they want about anything, so
Right.
long as it's not about personnel. But the practice, the tradition and practice, at least since I've been going to committee meetings, has been that the community comments have been understood to be about the work that the committee has done during that meeting. So first of all, is that okay? That there's
Yes.
a difference, and how could that be included into any type of community comment wording section of policy 2250.1?
so a board has control over how it conducts its meeting, and you can set the rules you want. And certainly at a committee meeting would not be the time to raise broad-based concerns over which the committee has no control or authority. So you can definitely limit it to what's being discussed at the committee level. And you can have the same time restrictions that you would at a regular board meeting. So you have discretion to do what you want. You could announce those rules at the beginning of each committee meeting, or you can put that in policy if you want to.
Okay, Dr. Block, what is your feeling about council's suggestions?
I think we should put in rules.
Deb, I'm just going to point out, we do not have in our policy anything about the time limits. That's a practice. That's a rule that we have in place. We could change that at any time. So our policy for participation at board meetings is very general. I think we reviewed it at some point a couple of years ago, 2020 actually, and we discussed in 2020 not putting in time limits per se, because it needs to be at the flexibility of the board. So we could decide, Adam, as a board, to give 1 minute to every board member, to every community member. We don't, or, so we also can decide as a board that their comments don't have to be general, that they have to address out, specific agenda items. Like, these are things that we can make these decisions on. So I just I think your point, Adam, about community comments at committee meetings is a valid one, because it doesn't say anything in our policy about how we're dealing with community comments. And we could add something about very general about it as well. But I think we shouldn't, to Mr. Smith's point very early in the meeting, we shouldn't limit ourselves in our policy on how we handle our meetings, because these are our work sessions. This is the board's job. This is what we have to do our job.
So I'm not sure that I agree, and here is why. I feel like there was a time a few months ago that I recall a meeting where comment went on for many, many minutes, and we were talking about ending the comment, and they were like, well, we don't have a policy that says that we can end it. And so what I'm hearing now is that we don't need a policy, but what I heard at the time was we need a policy. So we can either use the power, or we have to give ourselves the power. So I was told that we couldn't use the power without giving ourselves the power. So I'm proposing a policy.
It wasn't policy the answer wasn't policy, it was practice, and that we shouldn't change our practice, abruptly. We can decide as a board, and coincidentally, we as a board have our board development tomorrow, where we will be assessing how things are going. And so we can decide as a board to change our practice and say that that's up to us to decide. That's what I'm trying to say to you, is that the policy, and I'm going to read public participation at board meetings. The Board of Education encourages public participation at regular and special board meetings. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing at the meeting, and the topic that they wish to discuss. Comment should be as brief as possible to school matters. That's what our policy says. It does not say comments need to be limited to 3 minutes. Again, if you want to bring this up again as a discussion, this was discussed September 2020. That was the last time this policy was changed. So I'm just saying, maybe we add that same wording to the standing committees as well. And maybe the standing committees recommendation is that the wording should be as brief as possible and relevant to the topics that are discussed at that committee meeting. I mean, again, this is the discussion I think you're trying to start.
But the entire board was here for this, and basically the entire board is here now. And my recollection was that we said, can we stop the comments? And the answer was no, we can't stop the comments because we don't have a policy to stop the comments. So here I am recommending a consistent limit on comments, which is consistent with board practice. And we're saying no, because we have the power to stop it. And so am I the only one that remembers this happening? Can somebody else speak up? Because if I'm the only one, I will drop this, but
No, I remember.
But this definitely happened.
It happened. You're not imagining it.
So then
let's
create a policy to prevent this.
Wait, so we said that we had a policy that wouldn't stop it? Because if that's the case, we were all wrong. We do not have a policy. I'm reading you the policy. So we said we had a practice. And I believe, Adam, we were saying that, if I remember the conversation the way we remembered, is that we couldn't just make a sudden change. Yes. That's what I remember what we said. Not that we had a policy. We had a practice. There's a big difference.
This is Rachel. I have to jump off, but just want to add a piece of information. I think that the detail, Adam, that you're not fitting in there is that we have to be very careful that it doesn't look like we're making content-based decisions on who we allow to speak, how long we allow them to speak. That's why it has to be a practice. It can't be in the moment we say, you know what, you get less time, we're cutting you off, because it looks like then we are differentiating based on what someone is saying rather than having made a decision about what the process should be as a whole. I think that's the important
but
part.
but Rachel, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is a 3-minute cap that is consistent with what we do at the board meeting, because there was a time that a, member of the community was far exceeding that cap and there
No,
wasn't
I
much.
understand that, but I think that's why at the time we didn't want to just cut somebody off, because then it looks like a content-based decision, right? Then we're in the territory of a free speech violation. That's why we want to have an actual policy.
So-
If we
So
do.
you support having a policy. I support having a policy. There's no reason not to have a policy, and I'm not sure why I'm getting pushback on this. I thought this
I
would
have
be
to
relatively not
go.
controversial.
I have to
No,
go. You asked. I don't necessarily support it, but I'll jump in at the meeting.
Okay,
So again, Deborah, what I'm hearing is this back. So maybe what needs to be done is we need to discuss the actual policy number 2370 again, which says public participation at board meetings. And what I'm hearing Adam say is that that he thinks, or he thought, that we had a time limit in our policy. And that we should put a time limit back in our policy. I do not know. Again, what I would disagree with that. But I think we should then take it back. I think we need to have the flexibility to make changes. But if what Adam is saying is that our standing committees should be consistent with our regular board meetings, which that I think we're all in agreement with, and we should be consistent in our practices there. So if there's, and that's what I think he's referring to.
I would support that. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think what Dr. Block is saying is that we should have going forward, so that everybody has notice and everybody is treated equally and fairly. We should have a 3-minute limit at the committee meetings, the same way we're having it at the regular board meeting. We're going to use it as a practice, so we're not going to codify it into the policy, but we're going to have it understood as a district and as a community that this is how we're going forward. And to Mr. Miller's point, because committee members don't have authority to, like, I can't discuss a budget and facility, we're not discussing that here. We should add into the policy that only items on the agenda or relevant to what's being discussed at that meeting, or however we feel. I don't know if we should broaden it and say only policy matters can be discussed at policy, because if if the item is not on the agenda, do we want to raise it in the meeting? Traditionally, we've stuck to the items on the agenda in terms of our community comments. It's just been the way it's flowed, and I think it's worked really well and been very productive. And I do see hands raised in the participants, so I know that you're there. So I think we can have everything we want, we just handle it differently. We announced to the public that we're going to institute the 3-minute time limit, just as at the regular board meetings, because we do have people here who need to work after, this meeting ends at 11 o'clock, so it doesn't go on. But also that we stick to the items on the agenda and we put that in the policy. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Emily, you're muted. I see Adam.
I'm just
Dr.
saying
Buck,
we
you're
need
thinking
to bring this back to the full board. Again, we can make decisions here. So I think that's what we're sensing. You need to bring it back to the board, because I don't know what the other
But
committee.
we can make the recommendation in the policy and then bring it on for a first read, just as we did with the school board policies and
Right.
all the other stuff. Follow the regular process and then have the full board weigh in on what our recommendation is based on what's come out of the policy.
But you're making also recommendation on the practices. So the policy committee can make a recommendation on how the policy committee deals with community comments as a practice. But then the budget committee, right, should discuss how they're going to deal with community comments, because the budget committee may think it's important. I'm just saying we should all, again, I think this is something that we should discuss tomorrow. We have board development, and I think this belongs more in board development than it does at this stage right here.
Okay, well, I am going to make an announcement at the end. The community comments need to be limited to 3 minutes. Okay, just so everybody here knows, from the first person to the last person. I'm going to take that as the chairperson because I see the time. I also see that we have 2 items left on the agenda. I still think that the policy itself can be tweaked to talk about the fact that we're going to stick to items on the agenda. And it doesn't matter what, we're the policy committee. We're the ones in charge of the policies for all the committees. So I think the recommendation should come out of this committee as to how all the committees function. We can't have all the different committees deciding to function in different ways according. And then at the general meeting, if the chairperson for curriculum says, this doesn't work for my committee, we'll try to find a way to fix it. But I do think we need to make a recommendation. So I would like to see that language added, something to the effect of topics, community comments shall be limited to agenda items, something very similar. And then we can talk about the time limit practice. I see Ms. Malcone nodding your head in agreement. Dr. Block. Okay, so let's go forward with that idea. I'm not hearing.
Excuse me, just to be
anything else.
clear, Deborah, is that
Yes.
addition going to be made to the board standing committee policy or to the 2370?
No, to 2250.1, which is the board standing committee. Yeah. And that can go someplace at the end. We can add something that says public comments. The community is welcome to comment. Comments shall be limited to items on the agenda. Okay.
Howard, can I ask a question? Our
Yep.
committees, are we required to have community comments at our committee meetings?
No, you're not required to have community comment at a board meeting.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
you know,
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then let's put that on for a first read with that language. I think, and if we have any objections to it, we can look at it beforehand, as long as it's been posted to board docs and we discuss it fully at the full board meeting. Okay. Okay, Dr. Shields, I think you have updates for us on 1.9.
Yes, I just wanted to give you an update on the equity, inclusivity, and diversity work that's being done in the district. As many members of this committee are aware, we had a meeting on the 23rd of November where NYU Metro representatives spoke to a group of people, administrators, board members, leaders of different constituent groups here on the staff about what they learned through a committee process over the last 6 months roughly. And there's still going to be ongoing conversations about what next steps are, and that will be brought back to the full board. So I just wanted to give you an update on that because that was something that we discussed at a recent meeting. And eventually, I know the topic came up, do we want to have a policy on this topic? And I said, I think we get deeper into this conversation with the staff and the board, we can answer that question.
Thank you for the update. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, no, great. Item 1.10, our student discipline tone.
Yeah, so the code of conduct is a topic that is part of that equity, inclusivity, and diversity conversation. The district will be looking at its code of conduct over this next year to make recommendations on revisions to it. But that will be part of the action plan that comes out of the work that we've done with NYU Metro.
Question.
Dr. Bach?
So Dr. Shields, is it your expectation that basically the recommendations from NYU Metro will be basically like edits to the current policy, or do you think that they're going to be looking to develop a new policy whole cloth or take from another template?
I believe NYU Metro is not looking to come in and make the edits themselves. What they would do is they would set a set of process in place for staff members to look at the code of conduct with certain pieces in mind of how we can make it more modernized. They will give us access to other codes of conduct in other districts, but their feedback is that we should look at it and make it more up to date.
So
Meaning being done by, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nan.
Yeah, I think I had asked this question at a previous meeting. Based on their recommendations, just in general about the district, administration is going to go to task on this baby, and good luck.
Correct. It'll be a very large charge that will be given to a group of people to try and take a look at.
Dr. Block, any questions? Ms.
I
McComian?
do, but I think Nan was
sure.
ahead.
So are we forming a committee to look at this code of conduct? What will be the process?
So I don't think that's been defined yet. There are conversations that are taking place with NYU Metro on next steps that will be brought back to the board. I imagine that there will be a group of people that we will need to look at the code of conduct. The exact makeup of that group has not been discussed at all.
So my comment is that, I saw the work that NYU Metro did, and without actual recommendations to our policy coming from them, I think that work is not what I expected. It is also it is my understanding that they are looking for renewal of a contract. In other words, that they want to have another contract with us. So it would be my expectation that given that they have the expertise, that they would be making actual physical recommendations to us rather than just creating process to recommendations. And I say this to this group because I understand that this topic will be on the board meet agenda for in January. And these are the sorts of questions that I will be asking in that board meeting.
Okay, we've all been warned. Thank you. Duly noted. Heads up is always nice. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about this item? This is going to be a big task. I remember the last time this went through several years ago, it was quite the task. So the next item on the agenda before we get to community comments is item 1.11, homework. Just to say that will be discussed at the next meeting, but I don't want to steal your thunder, Dr. Shields. Anything you want to add?
You're correct. I just wanted to get it on the agenda because I know it was brought up at a recent board meeting. So I thought it was important to at least put it on the agenda. So I'm acknowledging the conversation and moving forward with it's something that we will be looking at.
Okay, thank you. And that will be a policy committee meeting. Okay, I want to turn, if there are no further questions, I want to turn to the hands that I have raised. I'm going to assume that the way I see them is the order in which they were raised. So Mr. Borda, out of fairness, I am not going to confine this to the agenda items because nobody had notice of that before they came to the meeting. But for sake of brevity and the fact that we do have people here who need to get back to work, I would ask if possible that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you. And I'm going to unmute you. Let me see. You should be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this has been kind of an upsetting meeting. I have more than 2 cents to say, maybe 10. Sorry, Mr. Block, Dr. Block. I'm glad that Mr. Miller has thoroughly clarify the issue that there is implied and explicit authority of the Board of Education, and that the Board of Education, as it wishes, can waive any policy. And that means even having to consult with anybody except even the PGCD. So yes, the Board of Education, because it can do something doesn't mean that it should do it. This issue of limiting people to speak during standing committees, Dr. Block, there is a big difference in between standing committees and community comments at the Board of Education. The standing committees were created so that the community would have a chance to talk. I do understand that sometimes there are several members that want to speak and it has to be fair for everyone, but it is an open forum for community to put in their input. If you start limiting, which you can, by the way, I recognize that the board can do, you would be doing a disservice. I can see already people putting postcards in front of the Board of Education saying our freedom to speak has been limited. It is, you have to use your discretion. Everyone at the board is a smart person. They can use that discretion to know what is right and what is wrong. But do not go there because it's really, I'm getting tens of texts right now that about freedom of speech, that this is totally Stalinistic, one comment says. There is no requirement of the, just want to say something about attendance. There is no requirement by the state to recognize excellence, but is encouraged. You want to maybe have certificates of attendance, and you can even have pins that the students can receive. That would be good. In terms of what people want in this town is consistency, uniformity, and fairness. I forwarded to the board and Dr. Hines a proposal for grading. I know the board members, some of you have had kids in the district. It is totally unfair how grades are assigned. Also, the departments, particularly at the high school, need to have a grading policy. It can't be that a grade, I have never heard in my life that a grade is made up by the teacher. Even at Stuyvesant High School, there is a grading policy. Bronx Science, any school, Jericho, Syosset, you need to have a grading policy by department where the parents know this is what is required. These are our expectations. It's not like the buyer beware. And this is what is needed with whatever grading policy you come up with. So why don't you have a survey, anonymous, of parents? What is it that they want in grades? You don't have to go with it, but at least it will inform you as to what upsets parents or not. Some of you are parents. Some of you went through the entire district, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking from the left side of my head. So please, before you go on, limiting speech, especially at the standing committees, which is the area where the community can have an input, and there is a conversation. So if they did, I don't know if Mr. Block is trying to sort of like shut me up, which I can, okay, that's fine. But that's fine. If that's what the Board of Education is, I will tell you one thing very clearly, I will not be shut up. Whether it is here or whether it is in the media or in the newspapers. So I am asking you, you have been reasonable people in the past. Please do not go there. And please do explain to Dr. Block the difference between standing committees and the Board of Education. So it's a big difference, and it's based on precedent as well as practice. And there are commissioner regulations that have dealt with these issues when it has come up in the past. I hope we don't go there. Thank you.
Okay, did Mr. Miller, okay. I thought you had your mic off. Ms. Brazil is next. Let me just allow you to talk and unmute you. Am I successful?
I know, I'm just texting you. I'm texting
Yes.
you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had two things. When we were talking about the policy for attendance, it was mentioned that there was a regulation that required us to offer an incentive for people or children to have perfect attendance. I just wasn't clear on where that regulation comes from. I thought they said, like, I'm wondering, is it something from the state? Is it a legal thing that we have to do? Whose regulation is that? And then with regards to community comments, I understand the desire for a 3-minute limit. People do have things that they need to do outside of this meeting. However, I don't think it should necessarily be limited to just what's on the agenda. For example, this is a policy and personnel meeting. If I have a concern or something I want to share about a policy that happened to not be discussed today, I don't think I should be prohibited from doing that. I think this would be the perfect environment for me to do that. You know, I have no idea what the if there's any underlying reason for this other than, I don't know. I didn't take it as being a freedom of speech thing. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me see. And then Ms. Chofan has her hand raised. Let me just unmute you and lower your hand.
Deb, were we going to answer Ms. Brazil's question though? She wanted to know about the specifics about the policy, like the reasons, because that has been our practice that we've answered questions at committee meetings. Like why the whole incentive question.
Oh, I didn't answer because I remember last meeting, somebody asked a question and, okay. So we have typically in the practice, questions outside of the committee meetings haven't been raised. The meetings have been in person, and usually the comment almost always were about what was being discussed right then and there at that meeting.
No, Deb, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. That's not the question I'm talking about. She asked a question about the attendance policy and about
I'm sorry. Oh,
that's the question she was asking about where.
Sure. Mr. Miller had referenced the fact that I believe it's a state education regulation. I don't know which one, maybe Mr. Miller can. The regulation that requires a district to have some type of incentive language in the attendance policy.
Yes, it is a regulation, and you could likely find it on the New York State Education Department's website. And when I think the question was also about what we're referring to when we say NYSBA, and that's the New York State School Boards Association, and they provide school districts with model policies that have in them cites to regulations of the Commissioner of Education.
Thank you. Okay, let me go back to my list. I want to, I think you muted yourself. Thank you very much. Ms. Chofan, if you want to unmute yourself. Do you have that ability?
Yes, hi.
Yes, great. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Theodora Chofan. I'm a parent and resident in the district. I also was recently appointed as the district lead for Moms for Liberty. I encourage you to look up this incredible not-for-profit organization. It is nationwide. And one of the things it does, it speaks up for parental rights. And so in that context, my comment will be brief, or rather it's a question again. Do you see parents as allies when it comes to determining if any harassment or sexual discrimination is occurring in our schools? And do you have a system in place for primary school students to report any inappropriate touch that may have occurred that they themselves?
You've cut out for me. I don't know if anybody else has heard you.
I
Ms.
apologize. I'm driving. I apologize. I'm driving, so I'm not sure where I cut off.
I started writing, our parents, do you think parents are allies? And then I didn't hear anything. I don't know if anybody else did.
I am driving, so we can leave my question at that. I don't know how much you can hear me, but basically, do you see parents as allies? And that is also from a legal point of view when it comes to determining whether harassment is occurring. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. I do not see any other hands raised. So on that note, unless anybody has, oh, Mr. Miller has posted in the chat, the specific regulation is 8 NYCRR 104.1. That refers to the regulation that requires the incentive language in the attendance policy. Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Miller. If no one else has any questions or comments, I think we should adjourn this meeting until January. I will make a note of some of the questions that have been asked to funnel to Dr. Shields for Mr. Miller to answer in the future. And on that note, our next meeting is January 19th. Actually, it's 2022. I just noticed on the agenda it says 21, so let's not go back. Let's look forward to the new year in good health. I wish everybody happy holidays, happy new year, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.